At this point, we've styled many of the typographical elements on our site. If we jump back to the mockup, there are still a number of pieces that we haven't tackled. For example, the header, the navigation, and if we scroll down, the contact us form and the footer. But let's step back for a moment and look at what we've done so far. So I'm going to jump to our code in the editor, and let's look at our CSS. So there are several properties at this point that keep getting set in our different selectors. For example, we have font family, which is sans serif here, and everywhere else where we're affecting font, we're using that as well. Here in the slide title, here in the paragraph, and if we scroll down, we'll see that repeated several times. When we see something like this, it's time to evaluate whether we want to change the default for the browser. So we know that in Chrome at least, the default is a serif font. But when we look at the mockup, every typographical element on the page is sans serif. Chances are this trend will continue as we add styles for more pages. So this seems like a good candidate for setting a different default than the browser's default. We can do this several different ways. The first is one that we've already done, though we weren't really intending to set the default for the browser that time. In that instance, we edited the styles for an HTML element, specifically the h2 tag. By doing that, we're changing the browser default whenever that element is being used. But if we want a CSS property to cascade to every element by default, we have two options. The first is by using the HTML body tag. So if we go to our editor and we scroll up to the very top, again, we're going to want to order our HTML according to specificity if we can. And so any styles that apply to an element tag, like we've talked about before, are going to go at the top. It's just that at this point, we've removed every style that originally applied to a default HTML tag. So let's add our selector in. We're going to use the body tag. And let's copy this font family over to the body tag here. So this is another element of cascading style sheets that we didn't talk about before, which is that when elements set a style, they will cascade into any elements contained in that element as long as those contained elements aren't overriding the style. And this goes for all HTML tags, headings, paragraphs, tables, lists, everything. So in our index.html file, our body tag surrounds all of our content. And so if we set a style on the body tag, it will cascade down to everything unless it gets overridden, though this does have some exceptions. Let's see how this works. So I'm going to go back to our CSS file, and then I'm going to do a search in our file for font family. When figuring out what to search for, I'm being careful not to include any characters that might not be consistent throughout the file. So for example, we've standardized on having a space between the property and the value, but it's possible that there are some places where that's not happening. Also, I'm making sure not to include the indentation because that's also something that could vary across the site. But if we search for font family directly, we'll get to see every place where this property is being set. So when I do the search in my editor, it highlights font family with yellow. And so I can just scroll down the page since it's small enough and just remove each one of these lines. Okay, then I'll save this and jump back over to the browser and I'll refresh. And you can see that everything still has a sans serif font.